MMA versus boxing. They did that to Tony, too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, no, it's not. Excuse me. When Tony fought Randy, that was not MMA versus boxing. That was a boxing guy versus an MMA guy, but they're doing it in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
It favored Randy. Randy was a champion of the world in that. But the same thing goes here. It's like, no, this isn't MMA versus boxing. And a lot of people want to see Conor, get his face pushed in it like the puppy that missed the paper. But that's really not what's happening here. Conor's in a no-lose situation.
Absolutely.
In fact, not only is he winning because it's so hard politically to get that fight, not only does he win financially, but he also wins in the side of courage. Conor is a guy who has said, I will fight anybody, anywhere. I mean, he's gone after Tyron Woodley publicly.
Yeah.
It came after Jose Aldo when Jose hadn't lost in 10 years, stopped him in 13 seconds, went up a weight class, became the first ever mutual champion to have 2 belts in 2 divisions, sitting and reigning in the UFC at the same time. Conor's done some really amazing things, but for me, his stock goes up.
I agree.
Willing to go in there and put this on the line.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like I'm bad-mouthing the guy because I'm a huge fan of him. I think he's great.
Oh, no, I understand.
Absolutely.
I understand completely. I'm not bad-mouthing him either. I'm just saying for boxing, they're the one with the pressure on them. Mm-hmm. Floyd's got to go out, and he's got to not only dust him, but it's got to dust him quickly.
He's got more to lose than he's going to win, but obviously money is that variable.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, but I just think that that's the bigger storyline. I think that there's really been a commentary and a phenomenon that has gone throughout the country where they do not understand and appreciate boxing, and I've been on that side of it too, where I've used my hands so much, had great coaches like you and Clayton and Curtis, and I really spent some time on striking, and then I've gone with boxers. I've gone with guys that this is all they've done. They didn't waste any of that practice time with the wrestling and the triangles and the tire flipping and all this. All they did is box since they were little kids.
That's it.
And I mean, it's a different experience. It's a different rhythm. When I go with Joe Schilling, it is a different rhythm and different pressure. And it's not competitive.
There's shifts. I call it gear shifts. Guys that boxers a lot of the time are able to shift into different speeds and rhythms, and you're not fighting at the same pace all the time. You're exploding, and then you're kind of snake charming them, slowing the rhythm down. You jump back in with a quick combo. I take a couple of my guys over to some of the boxing gyms over. Some of my guys from Extreme Couture, I take them over to some of the boxing gyms in Vegas, and they work with these guys, and they walk out of there, and they're just like, wow, coach, there's another level to this I didn't even know existed. But it obviously it's you got to see it to know it, right?
Sure. No, I fully agree with that. Let's switch gears here. Did you happen to catch, or are you up to speed on Anderson Silva's appearance on Errol Hawani's show on Monday?
Well, I tell you that Anderson will fight anybody, won't he?
He'll fight anybody.
He'll fight anybody.
The thing about Anderson, I have to give him this. I got to give him this, though. Here's what's interesting. So, no, he will not fight anybody. I know what you're talking about when Joel came on and said that. It just infuriated me. He does pick his opponents. However, there's something interesting going on here where not only does he get a pass from me, maybe even a little credit, because here's what he did. He turned down Rockhold. He turned down Vitor Belfort. He then called out Yoel.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, wait a minute. If you call out a tougher guy than the ones you declined, maybe you do get a little credit here. So now he's not only called out Yoel, he has demanded Yoel to the point that he said, if they don't give me Yoel for the interim title on the Rio card, I'm done. Yeah, I'm going to walk away from the UFC. I don't believe him. I don't think that is true, but let's see how that all goes. However, he did say one thing that kind of makes it tough if you're in the UFC leadership, which is he said it's got to be for the interim belt. It's like, wait, Anderson, are you saying you'll fight Yoel because we want you to do a fight? I think we can get you Yoel. I'm just, if I'm Dana, hey, I think I can make that happen, but what's this interim title? We have a champion. Mm-hmm. Michael Bisping, and that champion is not hurt. He is not sick. He's not hiding in the closet somewhere. He's got a fight scheduled against the greatest of all time in George St. Pierre, who's moved into the weight class. This isn't a gimmick fight or a gimmick marketing strategy. This is the world champion versus the greatest to have ever done it, who has now moved into the weight class. So I don't know how you put an interim belt up. I think Anderson's argument, he didn't clarify this, but I think if I understood where he was going, I think his argument is, hey, that belt is held up. You're going to do this St. Pierre fight. So we need to keep the division going. And I'm scratching my head going, and that's not the same thing as, like, say, what Conor's trying to do, where he's trying to fight Floyd and hold up the MMA belt. It's not the same thing at all. If George St. Pierre comes into the weight class, George St. Pierre cuts the line. Now, he could go down to 155 and do that. He could come to 170 and do that. He can go to 185, and no reasonable person can argue that. He hadn't lost since the Matt Serra defeat in, what was that, 2004, 2003? I mean, it was so long ago, I can't even remember the year. That's a real fight. That's a legitimate fight. And that's the next fight. So I don't know where I feel like I really respected that he called out Yoel, that he was willing to fight Yoel in 5 rounds. Tough fight. Number 1 contender without a question. I really respected that, but I thought he laid down a gauntlet to make sure the fight couldn't happen, which is that it also had to be for the interim title. And you're kind of scratching your head going, no, wait a second. There is no need for an interim championship. I can't fulfill that clause. There was guys.
Do you think it's his way of, I don't want to say skipping the line, but skipping the line to guarantee him, if he does get past your Romero, that, hey, I am the interim champion, now you have to give me another fight with Bisping?
Yeah.
That's his play, right?
Yeah, that's the play there. And it's a pretty clear one. And I like it and I get it. I just don't know if that could be fulfilled. I can remember guys fighting. It was a long time ago when Pride was still around. And they were willing to fight anybody, anytime. You give me $500,000 and I'll be there. And it's like, well, wait a second. That's not anyway. You just priced yourself out of the fight. Well, you come up with the money and I'll do it. Well, I'm sure you would, but you made this gangster statement of I'll do it. I'll be there. But I don't care who. But then you put a clause in there that isn't reasonable. So that's kind of like saying, well, I don't really want to do the fight. I'm not really willing to do the fight. So when Anderson gave this speech, I was a little bit torn because I felt like he had passion, was speaking from the heart, and really wanted the Yoel fight. The other part of me goes, look, there's some gamesmanship here, and he just slipped a clause in. That would be a bad thing if they made that an interim title. It would be bad because the interim belt, and it goes back to boxing. It doesn't go back to, well, I can only say UFC because Bellator has never done an interim belt. So when UFC came along and came up with the interim, they had to take their cues from the other combat sport that had been there first, where they got the idea, which was boxing. And even Vince McMahon had done some interim titles, but there was rules to it. For Vince McMahon, if you did not defend your belt, and I get that this is a make-believe and fake, I get the whole thing, but he still had rules. If you do not defend your belt for any reason for 12 months, then the division is eligible to have an interim belt, or you could be stripped. In boxing, at one time, and feel free to correct me, but at one time it was if you do not defend your belt within 12 months, you were called a closet champion and you couldn't be stripped. You were eligible to be stripped and or an interim title could go up. Mm-hmm. What we've seen in MMA is they can bring out an interim title anytime they need to make a poster and they think that it's good for marketing. And so that's taken a little of the validity away. Only a little bit, because for the most part, and particularly when it started, it was for good reason, and they needed to do it. Now it's become a bit of a marketing tool. But if you were to tell me that this is going to be the interim title while the sitting current champion and Michael Bisping, who has just beaten Anderson Silva, has a fight booked, and that's the only reason he can't take that. You can't do an interim title when your champion's healthy and willing to go, and Bisping is healthy and he's willing to go. Yeah. Right? Am I right about that?
No, absolutely. That's the problem with boxing, is there's too many belts.
Per the make-believe rules of interim. Now, with interim, you can do anything you want, but per the make-believe rules that we agree that we can adjust on the spot, it still goes against it.
It should be used in a situation like a fighter's injured for he's a champion, he's out for a long period of time. He physically can't fight or defend his title, so maybe you give somebody an interim title. So when that guy does become healthy, you've got your number one contender or somebody holding the belt, makes it more compelling. But yeah, it can't turn into boxing, man. If this whole MMA, UFC, Bellator, if any of it turns into the boxing landscape of it, it's not good for the sport. It's not good for the fans. There's too many belts. I mean, who's the heavyweight champion of the world right now, right? Maybe Joshua, but there's 8 other guys that, are probably from Russia somewhere that are holding belts.
Right.
Legitimate belts. And then you've got all these other ABC belts that, I get guys I work with all the time that are world champions and belts that I haven't necessarily heard of or it's too much, man. This is what's happened. It used to become, so when somebody asked me a question like, was Mike Tyson the greatest heavyweight champion of the world? Well, of all time. Well, at one time, there was probably 3, maybe 4 belts at that time, somewhere around there that were legitimate. But back when you go back to like a Joe Louis era, there was one champ, and you had the belt or you didn't. There was no such thing as interim. I hope it doesn't turn all these belts and sanctioning bodies, if the dynamic of a UFC or another, starts to adopt some type of different rules where other sanctioning bodies can come in and whatnot. Yeah, because, what is an interim belt? You know what I mean? If the guy holding the belt can't defend it because he's hurt, you give 2 guys an interim belt opportunity, okay. I could